Ancient Krakow, spread out on the banks of the Vistula, for centuries served not just as a trade center, but also as a key to controlling the most important routes of Central Europe. By the beginning of the 20th century, this city had transformed into a true crossroads of the geopolitical interests of three powerful empires: the Russian, German, and Austro-Hungarian. Surrounded by a ring of hills and uplands, Krakow represented a natural fortress, the possession of which opened access to the heart of Poland and provided a strategic advantage in any military conflict. The heights dominating the city were not just points on a map, they were the keys to the gates of Central Europe. The Russian command saw Krakow as a gateway to German lands. German strategists saw it as a buffer protecting their eastern borders, and for Poles, it was a symbol of national spirit, a city of kings and ancient glory. It was here, at the crossroads of imperial ambitions, that one of the bloodiest and most decisive battles was destined to unfold, forever changing the fate not only of the city, but of the entire region. Krakow's geographical position made it a key point in the military confrontation of the early 20th century. The city is surrounded by a unique landscape, a system of hills and elevations forming a natural defensive perimeter. These heights not only form the picturesque silhouette of the ancient city, they determine its strategic impregnability. Krakow's northern heights, including the famous Wawel Hill with the royal castle, rise 40 to 50 meters above the Vistula Valley. This is not only the symbolic heart of Polish statehood, but also an ideal observation post, allowing control of approaches to the city from Silesia. The Russian command understood perfectly. By taking control of these elevations, they would gain the ability to shell the central districts of the city and key transport hubs. The southern hills, including Krzyżemionki and Krakos Mound, formed a second defensive line. This chain of heights, covered with forests, provided ideal positions for the defenders. Here, every ravine, every hollow became a potential trap for attacking troops. German strategists paid particular attention to this direction, understanding that the loss of the southern heights would open a direct path to the railway junction connecting Krakow with Vienna. The eastern approaches to the city were defended by the Dlubnia River, with its marshy floodplain, a natural barrier that turned any offensive into an extremely complex engineering operation. Here, on the eastern frontiers, Polish engineering units created a system of trenches and artillery positions, using the features of the terrain to enhance defensive potential. Krakow's western heights, including the Sosnowiec and Tyniec hills, controlled the most important roads leading to Silesia. Seizing these positions made it possible to cut off the city's supplies and isolate its garrison. Military theorists of all three empires agreed on one thing: Krakow's topography turned any attack on the city into a bloody ordeal. The heights created a multi-level defense system, where each subsequent line was more difficult than the previous one. At the same time, the terrain itself dictated tactics. The northern open slopes required massive frontal attacks. The eastern marshy areas forced the construction of crossings under enemy fire, and the forested southern heights turned the battle into a series of local clashes. By November 1914, a tense military situation had developed on the Krakow front. Three armies were preparing for a decisive clash, each with its own forces, tactics, and strategic objectives. Russian troops were represented by formations of the Southwestern Front under the command of General Ivanov. The core of the strike group was the Third Army of General Radko Dmitriev, about 120,000 bayonets and sabers, 400 guns of various calibers, including the latest howitzers. Russian infantry, hardened in previous battles, relied on the proven tactic of massive frontal attacks with powerful artillery preparation. A feature of Russian strategy was the formation of assault groups of Siberian riflemen, specially trained for breaking through fortified positions. German forces defending Krakow included units of the 9th Army of General Mackensen, about 85,000 men with 350 guns. German troops were distinguished by high mobility due to mechanized units and a developed field communication system. Their doctrine was based on flexible defense with subsequent flanking counterattacks. The German command actively used the latest technical means: airplanes for aerial reconnaissance and heavy mortars for destroying fortifications. Polish formations, operating jointly with the Austrians, numbered about 40,000 soldiers of the Polish legions under the command of Józef Piłsudski. Despite their smaller numbers and limited armament, only about 120 guns, Polish units had excellent knowledge of the terrain and high morale. Their tactics were based on maneuver defense using partisan methods in wooded areas. Preparations for the battle were carried out by all sides with particular care. The Russian command developed a plan for the phased capture of the heights with the subsequent encirclement of the city. The initial blow was planned from the northeast, where the terrain allowed for the deployment of large formations. To ensure the operation, special engineering units were created, which were to build crossings over marshy areas. The German-Austrian command, anticipating the direction of the main attack, created an echeloned defense system. Long-term firing points with overlapping firing sectors were equipped on key heights. Special attention was paid to mining probable routes of advance and creating a mobile reserve for counterattacks. Polish units were tasked with holding the southern and western approaches to the city, using their knowledge of the terrain to organize ambushes and sabotage on enemy communications. A week before the battle, all sides conducted active reconnaissance. Russian airplanes flew daily over enemy positions, recording changes in troop dispositions. German reconnaissance groups penetrated the rear of Russian troops, gathering information about the concentration of forces. Polish scouts, relying on the support of the local population, created an effective network of observers who transmitted information about the movements of Russian columns. On the eve of the battle, tension reached its peak. Soldiers of all armies understood the significance of the upcoming battles. In the trenches, they wrote last letters home, checked their weapons, and commanders once again clarified their tasks. The outcome of the battle for the Krakow Heights was to determine the fate not only of the ancient city, but of the entire campaign on the Eastern Front. The morning of November 16, 1914, was unusually cold. A raw fog spread over the Vistula Valley, obscuring the outlines of the Krakow Heights. At 4 in the morning, the silence was broken by the roar of Russian guns. A massive artillery barrage had begun. Hundreds of shells rained down on the forward positions of German and Polish troops. The earth trembled, shrapnel cut down tree branches, and the air filled with the smell of gunpowder and burning. The Russian command concentrated its main strike in the northeastern direction, where the landscape allowed for the deployment of large infantry formations. After a 2-hour artillery bombardment, assault groups of Siberian riflemen went on the offensive. Advancing in short dashes, they overcame the first line of obstacles and broke into the enemy's defenses. The German command had anticipated this maneuver. Letting the first wave of attackers pass, the Germans opened flanking fire from pre-prepared machine gun nests. Simultaneously, Austrian artillery, located on Wawel Hill, struck the second echelon of advancing Russian units. By noon, the situation on the northern sector had become critical for the Russian troops. Having advanced 2 kilometers, they found themselves in a semi-encirclement. General Radko Dmitriev was forced to commit a reserve regiment to battle to straighten the front line. On the southern direction, events unfolded differently. Polish legionaries, using their knowledge of the terrain, set up an ambush in the wooded area at the foot of Krakow's mound. When Russian cavalry tried to outflank the main forces, it came under crossfire. Having lost up to a third of their personnel, the cavalry squadrons were forced to retreat. Weather conditions significantly influenced the course of the battle. By the evening of the first day, wet snow began to fall, turning the already muddy roads into an impassable mess. Russian ammunition convoys got stuck in the mud, which led to a decrease in the intensity of artillery fire. The German command skillfully used this moment. At dusk, mechanized units carried out a swift maneuver, transferring reinforcements to threatened sectors. Airplanes, despite unfavorable conditions, conducted reconnaissance of Russian positions, which allowed for the adjustment of heavy artillery fire. By the end of the first day of battle, it became clear that the initial plans required adjustment. The Russian command abandoned the idea of a frontal breakthrough and began preparations for a flanking maneuver through the eastern swamps. Pontoon units and light artillery were urgently transferred for this purpose. The German-Austrian command, in turn, strengthened the defense of the southern heights, understanding their key importance for holding the city. Polish units received orders to conduct a night sortie to destroy Russian artillery observers. The first clashes showed that the battle for the Krakow heights would be long and bloody. All sides demonstrated their determination to fight to the end, understanding the strategic importance of this ancient city at the crossroads of empires. Ahead were days of fierce fighting that would forever change the map of Eastern Europe and the destinies of thousands of people. The northern heights of Krakow greeted the dawn of November 21, 1914, enveloped in thick fog. A cold haze concealed troop movements, turning the silhouettes of soldiers into blurred shadows. The Russian command chose this moment for a decisive assault. At 5 o'clock in the morning, more than 200 guns opened hurricane fire on German positions on the Volsky Ridge, a key height dominating the northern approaches to the city. The artillery preparation lasted an hour and a half. Shells plowed the slopes, destroyed dugouts, and tore through wire entanglements. The earth trembled under the soldiers' feet, the air filled with the smell of burnt gunpowder and freshly plowed soil. When the cannonade subsided, assault battalions of the Arkhangelsk and Vologda regiments, elite units specially trained for breaking through fortified positions, went on the attack. The German command, anticipating the direction of the main thrust, concentrated the best units of the Silesian Corps on the northern heights. Trenches were dug in 3 lines, with an elaborate system of communication trenches. Machine gun nests, disguised as piles of stones, were placed on the flanks. When the Russian lines rose to attack, they were met with a hail of fire. The first wave of attackers faltered, failing to reach the German positions. The hillsides were strewn with the bodies of the fallen. However, the commander of the Russian division, General Sokolov, immediately committed a second wave to the battle. This time, the tactics changed. Instead of a frontal attack, the Russians used the method of infiltration. Small groups of fighters, using the terrain folds, stealthily approached enemy positions and bombarded the trenches with grenades. By noon, the situation reached a critical point. The Russians managed to gain a foothold on the eastern slopes of the Volsky Ridge, but the center and western flank remained in German hands. At this moment, the commander of the German forces, General Mackensen, made a risky decision: to transfer a reserve Jaeger battalion to the threatened sector, thereby exposing the central sector of the defense. The maneuver proved successful. The Jaegers, armed with the latest automatic rifles, struck the flank of the advancing Russian units. Simultaneously, artillery located on an adjacent height opened rapid shrapnel fire. The Russian offensive faltered. However, by the end of the day, the situation changed again. Polish scouts, operating in the rear of the German troops, blew up an ammunition depot on the western slope of the ridge. Taking advantage of the confusion, the Russian commander, Colonel Brusilov, a namesake of the famous general, led his battalion in a bayonet charge. In a fierce, hand-to-hand struggle, the Russians broke the enemy's resistance and captured the summit of the Volsky Ridge. By the evening of November 21st, the northern heights came under the control of Russian troops. The price of victory was terrible: more than 3,000 killed and wounded. German losses amounted to about 2,000 men. The hillsides, scarred with shell craters, were strewn with the bodies of the fallen. Medical teams from both sides worked all night, carrying out the wounded. Having captured the northern heights, the Russian command gained a strategic advantage. Now artillery could sweep the approaches to the city and the railway station. However, the German command was not going to give up. A strike group was hastily formed for a counterattack. The Battle for Krakow was just beginning, and its outcome was far from predetermined. Unlike the positional battles on the northern sectors of the Krakow front, the southern flank became the arena for a completely different kind of warfare. Here, the hilly terrain, interspersed with forests and ravines, created ideal conditions for maneuver warfare. The Russian command, realizing the difficulties of a frontal breakthrough in this direction, opted for an outflanking maneuver and the actions of cavalry units. On November 23, 1914, General Krasnov's Don Cossack Corps received orders to bypass the southern heights and reach the Krakow-Vienna railway line, thereby cutting off the enemy's main supply line. 3 Cossack regiments, reinforced by horse artillery, set out at dawn, moving through forested valleys hidden from enemy aerial reconnaissance. The German command, however, anticipated the possibility of such a maneuver. Colonel Hoffmann, responsible for the southern sector of defense, placed disguised machine gun positions along the probable routes of the Russian cavalry's advance. Simultaneously, Polish Jaegers occupied the commanding heights, preparing to act as observers and snipers. The clash occurred at noon in the Skawinka River Valley. The vanguard of the Cossack Corps, having overcome a marshy section, suddenly found itself under crossfire. German machine gunners, waiting until the main forces of the Russian cavalry were drawn into the valley, opened a barrage of fire from 3 sides. The Cossacks' situation became critical. The narrow valley turned into a death trap. At this moment, General Krasnov displayed brilliant tactical abilities. Instead of retreating, which the enemy expected, he ordered 200s to dismount and attack the nearest machine gun position, while the main forces, with a swift dash, broke through the southern section of the valley. The maneuver was only partially successful. About 600 horsemen managed to break through. The rest were forced to retreat, suffering heavy losses. The breakthrough group of Cossacks, under the command of Esal Shkuro, rushed towards the Skawina railway station. Within 2 hours, they managed to destroy the railway track and blow up a small bridge, temporarily paralyzing the supply of the Krakow garrison from the south. However, they were soon discovered by aerial reconnaissance and attacked by a hastily redeployed battalion of German infantry. After a fierce battle, the Cossacks were forced to retreat into the forested hills, from where they made their way back to their positions in small groups. Parallel to the actions of the Cossack Corps, an attempt to encircle Polish units occupying the Tyniec height unfolded in the central section of the southern flank. 2 regiments of Russian infantry, supported by light artillery, undertook an outflanking maneuver from the east and west, seeking to pincers the enemy. Polish legionnaires under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Rydz Śmigły, having detected the threat of encirclement, employed the tactic of elastic defense. They deliberately abandoned advanced positions, concentrating their forces on the hilltop. When the Russian units began to ascend the slopes, the Poles unleashed a hail of fire upon them from pre-prepared positions. The suburbs of Krakow turned into a real death labyrinth. Narrow streets, stone houses, courtyards, and basements, everything became a battlefield where conventional military tactics lost their meaning. On November 26, 1914, Russian troops, having secured the northern heights, began to advance towards the city's outskirts. The Krovodra and Lobzov districts, working-class neighborhoods with dense buildings and many small enterprises, were the first to come under attack. Every house became a fortress, every intersection a battlefield. The German command had prepared the city areas for defense in advance. Loopholes were made in the walls of buildings, and barricades of sandbags and overturned tram cars were erected at intersections. Special attention was paid to tall buildings, bell towers, water towers, factory chimneys. Snipers and observers were placed there to adjust artillery fire. Russian infantry, accustomed to open spaces, faced serious difficulties. The classic wave attack tactic did not work here. Attackers came under crossfire from windows and basements. Colonel Denikin, who commanded the assault units, quickly adapted the tactics. Infantrymen were divided into small assault groups of 5 to 7 people. Each group was assigned its own section and operated autonomously, clearing house by house, block by block. Sappers played a special role. They made passages in the walls of neighboring buildings, allowing the infantry to move without going out into streets under fire. When ordinary methods failed, bundles of grenades and flamethrowers were used. Polish units, defending their hometown, showed wonders of ingenuity. They used their knowledge of the terrain, secret passages, underground communications, through courtyards. Often, defenders left a building through basements when the Russians were already breaking in through the main entrance, and then attacked from the rear. The civilian population found itself at the epicenter of the fighting. Thousands of Krakowians took refuge in basements, churches, and tunnels. City authorities organized the evacuation of women and children, but many refused to leave their homes. The medical services of all warring parties worked to their limits. The wounded were placed in schools, theaters, and administrative buildings. Doctors operated by candlelight, often under artillery fire. Particularly fierce battles unfolded for the Krakow-Główny railway station, a key transport hub. The massive station building with thick walls and extensive basements was turned into a real fortress by the Germans. The Russians launched 4 assaults before they could establish themselves on the first floor. The battles for the upper floors continued for another 2 days. The opponents literally divided the building horizontally. Artillery was used sparingly in urban conditions. Russian batteries, located on the northern heights, could only fire with indirect aim, risking hitting their own units. The Germans used light field guns, bringing them out for direct fire to destroy particularly fortified buildings. By the end of November, the front line stabilized along the Rudawa River, which divided the city into 2 parts. The northern areas were controlled by Russian troops. The southern ones remained in the hands of German-Polish forces. Both sides, exhausted by the bloody battles, switched to positional defense, preparing for a new round of battle for the ancient Polish city. November 28, 1914, entered the history of the Battle of Krakow as the day of maximum tension for all warring parties. The pre-dawn fog slowly dissipated over the ravaged city when a courier arrived at the Russian army's command post with an order from Stavka. Capture Krakow at all costs within the next 48 hours. General Radko Dmitriev, understanding the decisive importance of this day, ordered the concentration of all available reserves for the final, decisive assault. On the northern sector of the front, 3 fresh regiments of Siberian riflemen, freshly arrived from the rear, were concentrated. On the eastern direction, heavy artillery was brought up, 24 large-caliber howitzers, capable of destroying concrete fortifications. The southern flank was reinforced with 2 Cossack regiments, tasked with a deep outflanking maneuver of the enemy's defensive positions. The German command also realized the criticality of the moment. General Mackensen personally arrived in Krakow to coordinate the defense. Guard infantry units and artillery batteries were urgently transferred from Silesia. Polish legions received reinforcements in the form of volunteer detachments formed from local residents. The artillery preparation began exactly at 6 o'clock in the morning. More than 300 Russian guns opened hurricane fire along the entire defense line. The earth trembled from the explosions. Stone buildings collapsed like card houses. The fortifications on Wawel Hill, a key height controlling the city center, were subjected to particularly powerful shelling. German artillerymen responded with accurate fire, trying to suppress Russian batteries. The sky over Krakow was shrouded in smoke, through which the rays of the rising sun barely penetrated. At 8 o'clock, the Russian infantry launched an attack along the entire front. In the northern sector, Siberian riflemen, using smoke screens, managed to overcome the fire-swept area and break into the first line of German trenches. Fierce hand-to-hand combat ensued. Bayonets, entrenching tools, rifle butts, everything was used. By 10 o'clock, the northern suburbs of Krakow came under the control of Russian troops. However, the German command immediately committed a tactical reserve. A battalion of Bavarian Jaegers, armed with the latest automatic rifles. The counterattack developed rapidly. The Jaegers struck the flank of the advancing Russian units, creating a threat of encirclement. Colonel Brusilov, commanding the northern grouping, was forced to throw the last reserve into battle, a company of machine gunners. Setting up, quote, on dominant heights, they created a curtain of fire that allowed the main forces to consolidate their captured positions. On the eastern direction, the situation developed differently. Here, Russian troops encountered a deeply echeloned defense created by Polish engineering units. Every house was turned into a fortress, streets were blocked by barricades, and cellars were connected by underground passages. The offensive proceeded slowly, with heavy losses. By noon, it became clear that a breakthrough in this direction was impossible without additional fire support. General Lechitsky, commander of the Eastern Grouping, decided to use a new weapon, chemical shells with chloropicrin. At 1 o'clock, a special artillery battery fired about 200 such shells at Polish positions. A poisonous cloud, driven by the west wind, covered the defensive lines. Without gas masks, the defenders were forced to abandon their positions. Russian infantry, taking advantage of this moment, advanced 1.5 kilometers into the eastern suburbs. The decisive events unfolded on the southern flank. Here, Cossack regiments, bypassing the enemy's fortified positions, reached the Bonarka railway station, a key transport hub through which the Krakow garrison was supplied. In a fierce battle, the Cossacks captured the station and cut the railway line. The German command, realizing the catastrophic nature of the situation, threw all available reserves into this sector, including police and rear units. By 16 o'clock, a real battle unfolded near Bonarka station. The Cossacks, entrenched in the station buildings, repelled attack after attack. When ammunition ran out, sabers and pikes were used. The outcome of the battle was decided by artillery. Russian mountain guns, moved to direct fire, decimated German reserves attempting to relieve the station. By 17 o'clock, it became clear that the strategic initiative had passed to the Russian troops. 3/4 of Krakow were semi-encircled, and the garrison's supply was paralyzed. General Mackinson, soberly assessing the situation, ordered an organized retreat from the city to avoid complete encirclement and destruction of the grouping. Under the cover of darkness, German and Polish units began to withdraw to pre-prepared positions west of Krakow. By midnight on November 28th, Russian troops controlled most of the city. The cost of this victory was terrible. More than 6,000 killed and wounded in just one day of battle. German-Polish losses amounted to about 5,000 people. The day of decisive attacks ended with a strategic success for the Russian army. But the war was far from over. New battles, new victories and defeats awaited ahead, and the ravaged Krakow, the ancient city of kings, plunged into an anxious silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crackling of burning buildings. Behind the dry figures of war reports and lines on strategic maps, there are always people, those who directly participated in events that changed the course of history. The Battle of Krakow was no exception. Hundreds of letters, diaries, and memoirs have been preserved in archives, museums, and family collections, revealing the battle through the eyes of its direct participants. These personal testimonies allow us to see living people with their fears, hopes, and anxieties behind the grand historical canvas. Lieutenant Stanislaw Komorowski of the 3rd Polish Legion wrote in his diary on November 22nd, "Third day without sleep. My eyes are heavy, my hands tremble with fatigue. But when you look at the towers of Wawel, you understand. There's nowhere to retreat. Behind us is not just a city. Behind us is the heart of Poland." These simple lines convey not only physical exhaustion, but also that special feeling experienced by Polish soldiers defending their native city. For them, it was not just a military operation, but a struggle for a national sanctuary. From the other side of the front, Russian artilleryman Alexei Petrov wrote in a letter home, "Yesterday, our observers spotted a German battery disguised in a school building. The commander ordered fire. I aimed the gun, but my hand trembled. I remembered that my nephews attend similar schools. I fired higher anyway, at the roof. I don't know if I did the right thing before God and the fatherland." These lines reveal the internal conflict that many soldiers experienced between military duty and human feelings. This was especially evident in urban battles, where the front line passed through residential areas. German Army non-commissioned officer Hans Müller confessed in a letter to his wife, "The most terrifying thing is not artillery shelling or bayonet charges. The most terrifying thing is the eyes of the locals. They look at us with such silent reproach that I want to disappear into the ground. Yesterday, an old Polish woman brought us hot soup right to our positions. Her house was destroyed by our artillery, and she feeds us. After that, I couldn't sleep." These words show how war blurred conventional notions of the enemy, forcing one to see fellow human beings in opponents and civilians. Tragic moments of fraternization between soldiers of opposing armies were also reflected in personal documents. Russian medic Ivan Sokolov recalled, "A wounded German officer was left in no man's land. He called for help all day. By evening, our Feldwebel couldn't bear it, raised a white flag and crawled to him with a flask of water." A medic also came out from the German side. Together, they bandaged the wounded man and carried him to the German positions. No one fired a single shot. And the next day, we tried to kill each other again. The daily routine of war was reflected in the diaries of the battle's participants. Polish legionary Tadeusz Kowal recorded, "November 25th. We haven't taken off our boots for a week. Our feet are swollen and bleeding. The bread is moldy. The canned goods are gone. Yesterday we caught a rat, fried, and ate it. It wasn't tasty, but it was filling. The Russians shell our positions every 2 hours. We've learned to tell time by artillery salvos more accurately than by a clock. Behind the front lines, in the shadow of ruined houses and to the roar of artillery, another war unfolded, a war for survival. The civilians of Krakow, caught in the epicenter of the battle, faced trials no less terrible than the soldiers at the front. When the first shells began to fall on the city's outskirts, many Krakowians refused to believe that war had truly come to their homes. The Kowalski family from the northern suburb of Krovodja was having breakfast when an artillery shell hit the neighboring house. Maria Kowalska later recalled. City authorities tried to organize an evacuation, but chaos grew by the hour. Thousands of refugees accumulated at Krakow Główny railway station. The last civilian train departed on November 21st. After that, the station only served military echelons. Those who couldn't leave were trapped. 70-year-old pharmacist Tadeusz Wiśniewski turned the basement of his pharmacy into a shelter for his neighbors. "About 30 people gathered with us," he wrote in his diary. "Mostly women with children and old people. Young men are either at the front or helping the wounded. We get water from the well in the yard, but every trip for it is a risk of coming under fire. Yesterday, a girl who was fetching water was wounded by a splinter. I bandaged the wound, but a real doctor is needed." In areas occupied by Russian troops, military authorities tried to establish supplies for the civilian population. Field kitchens distributed hot food twice a day. However, there was a catastrophic shortage of food. People traded family valuables for bread and groats. The situation was complicated by the onset of cold weather. Temperatures dropped to -10 degrees, and there was no fuel. The Novak family from the city center burned furniture and books in their stove to keep warm. "The worst thing is the cold and the uncertainty," Anna Novak recalled. "We didn't know who controlled the next street, where to run in case of shelling, where to seek help if someone got sick." Families with small children had an especially hard time. City hospitals ran out of medicines, and there were not enough doctors. Baby formula became a most valuable resource. There is a known case where a Russian officer gave his daily ration to a family with a newborn and went hungry himself. Teacher Zofia Majewska organized an improvised kindergarten in the basement of a ruined school. Children drew, sang songs, and learned to read, all to the accompaniment of artillery cannonades. "I realized that children needed not only physical safety, but also a sense of normalcy," she wrote. "When the shelling started, we turned it into a game. Who could hide best? Who would sit the quietest? City priests became true heroes. Father Andre from St. Mary's Church refused to leave his parish and held daily services in the church basement, despite the fact that the church dome had been destroyed by a shell. People need not only physical food but also spiritual support," he said, "especially when death becomes an everyday occurrence." When the front line stabilized along the Rudawa River, the city was literally cut in half. Families caught on opposite sides of the front had no way to contact each other. The story of Jan and Helena Wroblewski, a couple separated by the war, is well known. Jan found himself in the part of the city occupied by the Russians, and Helena in the German zone. Every evening they went to the riverbank at the same time, if only to see the silhouette of their loved one on the opposite bank from afar. One day, Jan, risking his life, swam across the river under the cover of darkness to bring his wife medicine for their sick daughter. The Battle for Krakow became a symbol not only of military confrontation, but also of human resilience in the face of unbearable trials. The fates of Krakow families who lived through those terrible days remind us that behind every military operation, behind every line on a map, stand ordinary people, with their fears, hopes, and an unyielding will to live. By early December 1914, the situation on the Krakow front had undergone radical changes. Russian troops, who had achieved a series of tactical victories and established control over most of the city, suddenly encountered serious difficulties which collectively led to a turning point in the battle. The first factor that altered the course of the battle was the supply problem. The rapid advance of the Russian army meant that rear services could not keep up with the forward units. Roads, washed out by autumn rains, turned into an impassable quagmire. Supply trains with ammunition and provisions got stuck dozens of kilometers from the front line. Artillery batteries, located on the northern heights of Krakow, by December 3rd, had almost exhausted all their ammunition, which sharply reduced infantry fire support. Soldiers on the front line received only half of their allotted rations, and cases of frostbite began due to a lack of warm uniforms. The German command, in contrast, managed to establish an effective logistics system. Using the Berlin-Vienna railway line, which remained under their control, the Germans quickly transferred reinforcements and ammunition. Every day, up to 20 echelons with troops and equipment arrived at the Krakow railway station. The second decisive factor was the events on other sectors of the Eastern Front. On December 4th, German troops launched a large-scale offensive in the Lodz area, threatening the flank and rear of the Russian grouping operating near Krakow. The Stavka of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief was forced to redeploy some reserves from the Krakow direction to counter this threat. 3 infantry regiments and 2 artillery brigades, intended for developing success near Krakow, were hastily sent to the Lodz area. This significantly weakened the striking power of Russian troops precisely at the moment when it was necessary to consolidate the achieved success. The third factor influencing the course of the battle was General Mackensen's skillful tactical decision. Instead of trying to regain lost positions with frontal attacks, he concentrated a strike group on the southern flank of the Russian forces. It included fresh units transferred from Germany, including the elite Brandenburg Corps and the Bavarian Mountain Division. These formations, well prepared for operations in winter conditions, were ordered to bypass Krakow from the south and strike at the Russian army's communications. The operation began on the night of December 6th. Under the cover of a blizzard, German units forced the Vistula River 15 kilometers south of Krakow and, meeting no serious resistance, rushed into the rear of the Russian troops. Simultaneously, Polish legionnaires, acting as part of the Austrian army, carried out a daring sabotage operation, blowing up bridges across the Rudawa River, which supplied Russian units occupying the northern part of the city. General Radko Dmitriev, commanding the Russian grouping, realized the scale of the threat too late. When reconnaissance reported the appearance of large enemy forces in the rear, the situation had already become critical. Russian units in Krakow were threatened with encirclement. On December 7th, an order arrived at Russian Army headquarters from Stavka. Immediately withdraw troops to the east bank of the Vistula to avoid disaster. The retreat began on the night of December 8th and took place under extremely difficult conditions. The temperature dropped to 20 degrees below zero. Visibility due to snowfall did not exceed 50 meters. Columns of supply trains and artillery moved along the only road that remained free from the enemy. Rearguard units fought fierce battles, holding back the pressing enemy. The wounded, who were evacuated last, had an especially hard time. Many of them did not survive this retreat, freezing in sanitary wagons. By December 10th, the front line had stabilized 30 kilometers east of Krakow. Russian troops entrenched themselves in pre-prepared positions. German-Austrian forces ceased their pursuit, having exhausted their resources. Krakow fully came under enemy control. The battle for the strategic heights of the city was over. The turning point in the Krakow operation clearly demonstrated how interconnected events are in various sectors of the front, and how important a role logistical support plays for troops. The tactical success of the Russian army could not be developed into a strategic victory due to logistical problems and the need to respond to threats in other directions. This became a bitter lesson for the Russian command and a subject of careful study in military academies of all warring powers. The Krakow operation became the subject of thorough military theoretical analysis in all armies of Europe. Each national school of military thought drew its own lessons from this bloody battle, which influenced the further development of military art. Polish military theorists, studying the Battle of Krakow, focused on aspects of urban defense with historical heritage. Colonel Sikorski, who later became a prominent military leader, noted in his work Tactics of Urban Combat. The defense of Krakow showed the critical importance of using urban infrastructure. Every historical building can become a fortress if its defense is properly organized. Particularly effective was the creation of multi-level firing points and the connection of basements with underground passages. Polish strategists also emphasized the importance of the moral factor in the defense of national shrines. The defenders of Wawel Hill fought with exceptional courage precisely because they realized the symbolic significance of this height for Polish statehood. German military analysts drew different lessons from the Battle of Krakow. General von Seeckt, one of the creators of the future Wehrmacht, wrote in his memorandum, "Lessons from the Eastern Campaigns." The Krakow operation clearly demonstrated the advantages of maneuver defense over static. Instead of holding every meter of urban territory, we should have immediately focused our efforts on controlling key transport hubs and dominant heights. German theorists paid special attention to the issues of interaction between different branches of service in urban combat. They noted the insufficient effectiveness of heavy artillery in urban areas and the need to develop special assault groups armed with light weapons. The Russian military school drew lessons from the Battle of Krakow regarding the tactics of concentrated attacks. General Brusilov, analyzing the causes of initial successes and subsequent retreat, wrote, "Our mistake was in scattering forces along the entire front. We should have created an overwhelming superiority in a narrow sector, and after breaking through, developed the offensive in depth, without being distracted by secondary targets." Russian military theorists also drew attention to the problems of supplying advancing troops. The textbook for the Academy of the General Staff noted, "The Krakow operation showed that the pace of the offensive should be determined not only by the combat capabilities of the advanced units, but also by the ability of the rear services to provide them with everything necessary." French military experts, closely following events on the Eastern Front, focused on studying the engineering support of urban battles. Colonel Pétain, future Marshal of France, emphasized in his report to the General Staff, "The Battle of Krakow showed that in modern warfare, the engineering preparation of urban territory is no less important than the size of the garrison." German troops managed to hold the southern part of the city precisely due to a skillfully organized system of fortifications and barricades. British military analysts, traditionally paying special attention to intelligence and information support, noted the importance of controlling the high points of the city. A secret memorandum from the War Ministry stated, "The side controlling the heights of Krakow gained a decisive advantage in observing enemy movements." Church bell towers and factory chimneys, which allowed for artillery fire correction, were of particular value. Of particular interest to all military schools was the experience of using new types of weapons in urban conditions. The use of chemical shells by Russian troops on the eastern outskirts of Krakow became the subject of thorough study. It was noted that in densely built-up urban areas, the effectiveness of chemical weapons was lower than expected due to the complex circulation of air currents between buildings. The lessons of the Krakow operation were reflected in the military regulations of all European armies. They influenced the development of urban combat tactics, the organization of interaction between different branches of service, and the training of officers. Many conclusions drawn from the analysis of this battle remained relevant until World War II, when urban battles again became one of the determining factors in theaters of war. The Battle of Krakow had far-reaching political and diplomatic consequences for all parties involved. In European diplomatic circles, the December events of 1914 caused a veritable storm. The initial successes of the Russian army and the subsequent retreat became the subject of fierce debate at the highest level. For the Russian Empire, the Krakow operation had a dual significance. On the one hand, the ability of Russian troops to capture most of a vital strategic center made a strong impression on the Allies. The French government, concerned about the positional stalemate on the Western Front, saw in the Russian offensive proof that the Eastern Front could be the key to victory in the war. Prime Minister Viviani, in a telegram to the Russian Emperor, wrote, "The heroism of the Russian soldiers at Krakow instills confidence in our ultimate victory." On the other hand, the subsequent retreat revealed serious problems in the organization of supplies and coordination between different fronts. Rumors began to circulate in diplomatic circles about a possible separate deal between Russia and the Central Powers. Foreign Minister Sazonov had to make significant efforts to dispel these fears. For Germany, holding Krakow became a crucial diplomatic trump card. Kaiser Wilhelm personally sent a congratulatory telegram to General Mackensen, calling him the savior of the eastern frontiers. The German press widely covered the victory, presenting it as proof of military superiority over the Russian Colossus. This was particularly important for strengthening the alliance with Austria-Hungary, whose leadership was beginning to doubt Germany's ability to protect the eastern borders of the Habsburg Empire. For the Polish people, the Battle for Krakow acquired symbolic significance, extending far beyond a military operation. The heroic defense of the ancient capital became a powerful catalyst for national self-awareness. Polish political figures of all persuasions used this fact to promote the idea of Polish independence. Roman Dmowski, the leader of Polish nationalists, then in London, sent a memorandum to the British government, in which he emphasized, quote, 3. The internal political consequences of the battle were no less significant. In Russia, the initial successes at Krakow caused a patriotic fervor, which, however, quickly turned into disappointment after the retreat. Criticism of the military leadership intensified in the State Duma. Deputy Milyukov, in his famous speech, for the first time openly raised the question. In Germany, on the contrary, the successful defense of Krakow strengthened the authority of the military command and the Kaiser personally. The Reichstag almost unanimously voted for new war credits, despite growing economic difficulties. Diplomatically, the Battle for Krakow influenced the positions of neutral countries. Italy, still wavering between the Entente and the Central Powers, perceived the outcome of the battle as evidence of a possible victory for Germany and its allies. This delayed Italy's entry into the war on the side of the Entente by almost half a year. Romania, also taking a wait-and-see approach, after the Krakow operation intensified contacts with Russian diplomacy, fearing an increase in Austro-Hungarian influence in the region. The memory of the Battle of Krakow continues to live on in the stone of memorials, the pages of historical research, and the hearts of the descendants of those who participated in those events. Each of the participating countries preserves its own particular vision of these tragic days, creating a multifaceted picture of historical memory. In Krakow itself, the memorial complex on Wawel Hill has become the central place of remembrance. A majestic obelisk of gray granite erected in 1924 immortalizes the names of Polish legionaries who fell defending the city. Every year on November 16th, on the anniversary of the battle's beginning, a solemn ceremony is held here with the participation of high-ranking state officials and descendants of the battle's participants. In the eastern part of the city, where the most fierce battles took place, an open-air museum, Rudawa Line, has been created. Fragments of trenches, dugouts, and artillery positions have been preserved. Visitors can see authentic items found during excavations, weapons, soldiers' personal belongings, and elements of ammunition from all warring armies. In Russia, the memory of the Battle of Krakow is preserved differently. During the Soviet period, this operation of the First World War, like many others, was overshadowed by the Great Patriotic War. Only in recent decades has interest in it revived. An exhibition dedicated to the battles for Krakow has been created in the Military Historical Museum of Artillery in St. Petersburg, featuring maps, photographs, and weapon samples. Special attention is paid to the heroism of Russian soldiers and officers. In Germany, the Krakow operation is primarily viewed as an example of successful defense and subsequent counteroffensive. The Military History Museum in Dresden houses trophies captured by German troops, Russian banners, weapons, and documents. Bundeswehr historians studied General Mackensen's experience in organizing mobile defense. Differences in national narratives about the battle are particularly noticeable in school textbooks. In Polish ones, the emphasis is on the heroic defense of a national sanctuary. In Russian ones, the courage of Russian soldiers during the storming of fortified positions is highlighted. In German ones, the strategic genius of the command and the steadfastness of ordinary defenders are emphasized. Fiction and cinema have also contributed to the formation of historical memory. The novel Ashes and Diamonds by Polish writer Andrzej Strug paints a poignant picture of the lives of civilians in the besieged city. Russian writer Valentin Pikul, in his novel I Have the Honor, created vivid images of Russian army officers who participated in the Krakow operation. German director Wolfgang Petersen, in the film Steel Storm, showed the battle through the eyes of a young German soldier. Archival research has become an important form of preserving memory. Historians from different countries work with documents, many of which have only become available in recent years. Joint Polish, Russian, German projects allow for the recreation of a more objective picture of events, overcoming national stereotypes and prejudices. Family archives, letters, diaries, photographs passed down from generation to generation play a special role. They preserve not only facts, but also the emotional dimension of historical events. In the 2000s, the international project Voices of the Battle of Krakow was created, within which memories of the descendants of the battle's participants are collected and published. More than a century has passed since the heights of Krakow became the arena of a bloody battle, but its lessons remain relevant even today. The Krakow operation, despite its relative obscurity outside professional military circles, continues to influence modern military science, international relations, and the national self-awareness of the participating nations. For modern military strategists, The Battle of Krakow represents a unique example of a complex operation, combining elements of urban warfare, fighting for heights, and maneuver operations in challenging terrain. American and European military academies include the study of this battle in officer training programs, especially in the context of urban operations. The experience of fighting in Krakow's historical buildings proved to be in demand in the 21st century, when conflicts increasingly unfold in urbanized environments. Of particular value is the analysis of the interaction of various branches of service in conditions of complex terrain. Modern military exercises often model situations similar to those that arose during the assault on the Krakow Heights. The need for coordination of actions in conditions of limited visibility, complex development, and in the presence of cultural values requiring preservation. In the sphere of international relations in Central and Eastern Europe, the memory of the Battle of Krakow continues to play a significant role. For Poland, the defense of Krakow remains a symbol of national resilience and self-sacrifice. Annual memorial events on Wawel Hill gather not only Poles, but also representatives from Russia and Germany, demonstrating how shared historical memory can serve as a bridge between former adversaries. It is noteworthy that in recent decades, historians from the three countries have conducted a series of joint studies, allowing them to overcome many ideological distortions in assessing the events. Archives have opened access to documents that had long remained classified, which allowed for the creation of a more objective picture of the battle. This collaborative work of historians has become an example of how professional study of the past can contribute to mutual understanding in the present. For the formation of national identity, the Battle of Krakow has different but equally important significance. In the Polish national narrative, it symbolizes the struggle for the preservation of the historical capital and cultural heritage. In the Russian narrative, it demonstrates the courage and professionalism of the Russian army, which managed to carry out a most complex operation under unfavorable conditions. In the German narrative, it emphasizes the strategic genius of the command and the resilience of the soldiers in defending a key point on the Eastern Front. A particularly important aspect of the modern perception of the Krakow operation has been the attention paid to the fate of the civilian population. While historical research previously focused predominantly on military aspects, now increasingly more attention is paid to the humanitarian dimension of the conflict. The stories of Krakow families who survived the horrors of the battles have become part of educational programs for preventing military conflicts. In the era of information warfare, the experience of the Krakow operation reminds us of the importance of a critical attitude towards propaganda. Differences in the coverage of events in 1914 in the press of the warring powers demonstrate how the same facts can be interpreted in diametrically opposite ways depending on political goals. Summing up our research, it can be said that the Battle of Krakow, despite its relative brevity and local nature, became an important link in the chain of events that determined the course of the First World War. It demonstrated all the complexity of modern military conflict, where success depends not only on the number of troops and the quality of weaponry, but also on logistics, morale, and the tactical skill of commanders at all levels. Today, when the world is once again facing the threats of regional conflicts, the lessons of the Krakow operation remind us of the high price of military solutions to political problems. Thousands of dead soldiers and civilians, destroyed quarters of an ancient city, broken family ties. All this makes us value peace and seek diplomatic ways to resolve international contradictions.